The grooves and dimples are never even. The eyes are displaced, overcome with wrinkles, bulged out, or shoved in towards the brain, giving ground. The forehead may fold to greasy ridges, the jawbones grind and click, and occasionally the ears may pop like in a swift dive. Some say the eyes are laughing when a smile is done right. Really, they are crying out. The smile takes something from the eyes, from the rest of the face, from the life of a person. Did you hear about that guy in Alabama who messed himself up from smiling too much? It happened at a 24-hour diner of a popular restaurant chain that won't be named here, during a 3-day Friday and weekend shift in the summer of the Bay, beach season. As part of this guy's manager training, I'm not sure whether it was done to humble or actually train him, but this young manager in training, a sort of tarnished golden boy, according to the description of the newspaper, was given the toughest frontline tasks. He washed dishes, cleaned bathrooms, and lugged around things like hash browns and eggs, all while greeting customers with booming yet pleasant energy and a broad smile. Well, he worked the 3 consecutive 13-hour shifts at the height of beach season on the bay. His hiring manager loomed in the background doing her own mysterious tasks, always somehow watching him. There wasn't much privacy as he washed dishes. In fact, the lines and stacks of dishes in the long, hot machine were expertly placed just behind the serving and checkout bar. Because he spent most of his time washing dishes, being the only one to wash dishes during his shift, he was in a perfect position to see every patron as they walked through the front door. To see and to be seen, and to greet with his huge smile and ever-friendly voice. Greet and wash. Greet and wash. Clean the bathrooms. Get those frozen hash browns from the back room and bring them to the cooks. You dropped that carton of eggs. See that yolk oozing out? Go ahead and throw them away and get another. You're not washing dishes quickly enough. Here, let me show you how. It's not my job, but you'll hold up the rest of us. From his own lips to the newspaper, he'd try to work faster. Then he'd notice some dishes with specks and blobs on them after they'd gone through, and he'd have to slow down again. Those dishes were very hot after going through the machine. It wasn't like any kind of dishwashing machine we're used to at home, but it was instead a kind of long assembly line of a box that steamed the hell out of them after he'd manually scrubbed them. He didn't know how others could tolerate it. It was like his hands were boiling in a pot as he dried and stacked the dishes. He performed his duties with a smile ironed out onto his face that he hoped wouldn't wrinkle when he finally sat down. He did it all while being watched. As for his constant smiling, he'd actually been at that for weeks before the manager training of the diner. He'd been trying to get ahead in the rough job market, in the depths of that economic recession. I think it was around 2010 when this happened, and he was supposed to have been trying a new grin therapy, or something to improve his moods, emanate goodwill, and get into the habit of keeping a smile. There were CDs and equipment right in the middle of that grin therapy. He'd gone to a local job fair and met the people at the diner chain's booth, who were recruiting aggressively for dynamos and hungry, friendly pack leaders, at a time when other companies were being picky about who to hire to take out the trash. They barely glanced over his resume before deciding he had the right stuff. Some sweaty handshakes, some cobbled together references, and a personality test taken at a public library later, and he was set up at a motel for his 3-day shifts at a restaurant location on the bay, and thrown into the water, so to speak, during a feeding frenzy. Hordes must have came for the eggs, bacon, and waffles. People with sandy feet, when they weren't wearing sandals or shoes, with scents of fish guts and stale beer surging through the front doors with them. People with their loud children, and, at night, louder drunks and youths probably wandered in from beach rambles, bar hops, condo parties, or nightly fishing expeditions with smirks and laughter and gazes that caught on him as he washed dishes, caught and lingered for too long like the gazes of grinning perverts or scientists. There must have been grin-offs, but he could never falter. One man interviewed by the newspaper, who was a kind of vagrant and whose status as a buying patron questionable, had said that, yeah, he'd seen the kid washing dishes. I told him to his face how sorry I felt for him. The man was quoted in the newspaper as saying, kid was smart looking and well kept, but you could see that he just didn't want to be there behind the counter washing dishes. Had the smile come off as artificial to the vagrant? Or had it slipped, parting like velvety curtains to offer a glimpse of what was behind? The newspaper didn't answer those questions, so I asked them now. Those long shifts on a weekend in a busier location, washing dishes, cleaning bathrooms, and greeting in between while constantly being observed by his hiring manager. It was all really part of the interview process. This paid training that he hoped was nothing like what he had been doing as a manager, and at any moment a slip smile could be perilous. You know, some people worry that will be all it takes to get passed up for a job. Some worry that a slip smile, or the habit of a slipped smile, will get them cut from their company. If it decides to tighten its belt, the habit of a slipped smile is a little like a slipped disc in the back. It could seriously impact the worker, making them unfit. One can imagine the clatter of the plates and shouts of the short-order cooks, the boisterous ringing and scraping and talking and laughing of the patrons, a child or two crying out, a drunk or two crying out a little later on, cigarette smoke scratching the throat, murky dishwater splashing up into the mouth from a flurry of quick washing. One can imagine all of that plus the non-stop smiling, helping to create the little twitch in the right eye that he told a journalist had begun for him around 7 p.m. of Saturday's long shift. But the catalyst had most certainly been the smile. A few patrons interviewed about it, and they didn't remember the smiling, which conflicted with the manager in training's report. They remembered a sadness to him, though they couldn't exactly recall the expression on his face. On Saturday night, around 9 p.m., as he told the newspaper, a warm, windy night, he saw someone he had known from high school. By then, his hair must have been matted with grease and sweat, his eyelids and lips sticky with syrup. All of that stuff would have been second or third hand. All of it but the sweat. The old acquaintance, who'd gone to the same private preparatory school in a nearby city, had come in with his thick but well-trimmed sandy blonde hair, gelled, not greased, fishing shorts with netted pockets, a Rodeo de Pech t-shirt, and a red snapper on the shirt pocket, and German-made leather sandals with large gold buckles. I think I've retained the details of that guy's attire so well because of my surprise at how vividly that manager in training recalled them to the newspaper. I thought they must be extra important to him. He told the newspaper, though, that the reason he knew it had to be the old schoolmate was the way the other guy kept hosing him down with his eyes as he scrubbed the dishes and loaded them in the machine. The old acquaintance just stood there, pretending to look above his head, but really staring a hole in his head, as if he wanted to get right on through and into his brain to figure out why he was here washing dishes behind the counter, when he had gone to that expensive private school with the rest of them. The manager in training wanted to shout at the old schoolmate, above the din of the restaurant, that he was the manager in training and not a dishwasher. His tortured pride burned in his ears. It whipped his nerves like a dish towel against someone's backside. He imagined this other kid was in law school or med school, and here he was washing dishes. The more that old acquaintance stood there, back a little from the mass of people near the counter but painfully close, the more that fellow was like a specter in a mist, although, with all the lights, it was about as bright and clear as a noontime beach in that diner. And just like a specter, he was gone one time when the manager in training looked up. Had he even ordered anything? After a second night of uneasy sleep, during which he once again used some equipment he had gotten in the mail to stretch his mouth, the manager in training woke up that Sunday feeling sore and confused. "I want to talk to you after lunch hour," his hiring manager said on Sunday, around 10:30 a.m. The manager-to-be was throwing up a column of plates so he could run over and clean the bathrooms. Lunch hour meant not lunch break, but lunch work for the employees at the diner. And it was long, actually Few hours. I want to talk to you about your personality test, his hiring manager said. He must have really begun to sweat after that, and I imagine him wiping a constant slime from his forehead. He told the newspapers. He had worried that whole time during the long lunch hour, as he worked and struggled behind his grin. He hadn't exactly lied on the personality test, but when taking it the previous week, he had most often chosen what he thought was the right answer. The answer they wanted over what he actually would have done or felt. For example, he had penciled in the bubble for often and eagerly introducing himself as well as others at social gatherings and networking events. He actually didn't attend such events, and when he did, he often waited until others noticed him, if they noticed him. He also had shaded in the answer for still having enough energy to entertain friends after a typical workday. Things like that. He had known the kind of person the company was looking for in a manager, and, after all, wasn't everyone saying to fake it until you make it? He could be like they wanted him to be, until he became that person, and if he couldn't, what were his other options? So when he finally sat down with his hiring manager, her name was Stella, to talk about the personality test, his nerves had jangled and joggled him to the point of exhaustion, and he didn't feel anything like the entity he had penciled in for that personality test. Stella was a short, fit woman, probably in her early 30s, with small features and a smile that had a lot of range. She'd struck him as the kind of person who already had mastery over it, who could produce a hippie smile or a sergeant smile, and just about every shade between, and who could slide through them as quickly and fluidly as a magician through a deck of cards. He told the newspaper he remembered they spent a great deal of time moving the oily plastic menus out of the way at their booth table. There were too many. You'd move one laminated sheet, and there would be another waiting behind it. She had a binder and a notebook, and he had nothing but his hands fidgeting under the table. The table smelled like pine bacon. She didn't ask whether he wanted to eat or drink anything. What followed was an inquisition in which each word pricked him like a pine needle from that pine bacon forest. She asked him the same questions from the personality test, but too quickly, barely giving him time to answer, trying to trip him up. Strongly agree, neutral, or strongly disagree. I take the initiative to plan and organize events for friends and family. I go out of my way to meet new people. I enjoy talking about myself. I rarely panic. If someone like an old granny falls down, I immediately run over to pull them up, even if they resist my help. I always report someone's error, even if it will get them fired, and they are my friend and have a family that depends on them. I take control. I am always in control. I may be paraphrasing a little, but that's the gist of it. He escaped by saying he felt sick, and he did, like someone who'd gone on those whirling teacups too many times. He said that it might be food that he needed, and she gave him not food, but something closer to a hippie smile on the spectrum. She said they'd go over his answers again later. After that, he started grinning with all of his teeth, as if that was something that could save him, though his teeth were yellowed and crooked, and one of them was missing. And though when another animal showed their teeth, it was a threat. He even ventured out from behind the counter a few times to try his toothy grin out on people at their tables. It was during one such expedition that a beefy man had turned from his wife, 2 kids, and egg slithers and brown-red pulp on his plate, had jerked so suddenly with a clotted frown, the frown of a man on a roof yelled at from below, that this young manager in training's response was to somehow stretch even more teeth into his smile. You might say that he grew extra teeth in that moment. The smile jammed the other features aside. The crookedness of it must have caused extra outward pressure on his already twitching right eye. Next thing you know, that sucker was ejected from its socket, completely ripping loose from what must have already been frayed optic nerve and eye muscle, and falling, I kid you not, onto that family man's plate of egg slithers and mystery mash. There was that moment of disbelief or shock. Then the family began to squirm. Someone at a nearby table shouted, "Awful prank. Don't tip him." They'd mistaken that young manager in training for a waiter. There were the harsh whispers and grinding, uncertain, chained-to-seat movements of people on a diving plane. These were the last things this tarnished, would-be golden boy of a diner chain remembered before he fell down and lost consciousness. Wait, there was one more thing. Just before he blacked out, he thought he saw his hiring manager standing with the people above. She might have just been a hallucination or a dream, but he told the paper that he told her, "I don't think I'll be a good fit." He'd said what he thought was on her mind. After surgery, he slept for a long time, longer than was usual without being in a coma. The eye was lost forever. The news report said he smiled the entire time when they came to the hospital to interview him. Not a single slip. At the mention of his eye squeezing out of his socket, his grin had reportedly not faltered, but had actually broadened. Funny thing is, he'd been smiling when they first walked in, even before they woke him up for the interview.
What's the creepiest unsolved mystery? Happened during the football championship 2006 in Germany. A girl named Frauke Liebs was watching a game with friends and texting her roommates not to worry, she would come home late. After leaving the pub at around 11 p.m., no one ever saw her alive again. Now the strange part. In the following week she texted and called a friend and her parents stating that she's alright and will come back soon, although with an unusual sleepy voice. At her last call she accidentally said yes when her sister was asking if she's been held against her will, and instantly correcting to a no. This was the last time someone heard of her. Her corpse was found in the woods close to where she disappeared 3 months later with no indication who her killer is. My favorite is probably John Lang's case. Basically, a local activist posts regularly about the Fresno Police Department and about how they were plotting against him. People thought he was crazy until he set up a camera that recorded lots of weird crap. Including a bunch of cops parking across the street from his house staring at him in the middle of the night, and a van pulling up with a large camera that people theorized took thermal pictures through walls to see if anyone was inside. He posted that weekend, the police was going to murder him and accurately predicted his death. The police released a report saying that he was stabbed repeatedly in the back, and then recanted saying it was supposedly a suicide of a crazy man. Antoinette Cayedito's kidnapping. She let her kidnapper in after he said that he was Uncle Joe, where they threw her into a van. The creepy part is a year later, someone called 911 claiming to be her and someone shouts in the background, "Who said you could use the phone?" and a struggle is heard before the call cuts off. Antoinette's mom said that she was sure it was her daughter's voice. Then 4 years later a girl matching Antoinette's description was acting strange in a diner, and left a note on a napkin that said, "Please help. Call police." She's still missing and she went missing in 1986. Disappearance of the Sodder children. Christmas Eve 1945. The Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia burned to the ground. There's the father George, the mother Jenny, and 9 children. 4 of the children escaped, but 5 were believed to have died in the fire. Then, during the search of the burned house, none of the children's remains were found. The fire was nowhere near hot enough to burn through bone, but not a trace of them were found. Here's the freaky stuff. 2 months before, a visiting salesman told George's house would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. The salesman attributed this to George's dirty remarks against Mussolini. George, an Italian immigrant, had been outspoken against Mussolini, which angered some in his Italian-American community. Another visitor later told George that his fuse boxes would cause a fire someday. This was after George just had his electricity rewired and inspected to be safe. In the weeks before Christmas, the older Sodder children noticed a car following them through the main town as they walked home from school. During the night of the fire, Jenny was awoken by a strange phone call after midnight, asking for a name she did not know. At 1 a.m. Jeannie heard a loud banging on the house's roof, but went back to sleep when she did not hear anything further. Half an hour later she smelled smoke. The fire seemed to start near the fuse box. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children who had been sleeping downstairs escaped the house. They yelled to the children upstairs but heard no response. The fire had already been engulfing the staircase, so they could not rescue them. George tried to go outside around the house, to use a ladder to climb the window to the attic and rescue the children. But the ladder was not in its usual place. It would be found 75 feet away in an embankment. Then George tried to drive both his truck to the window, then climb them. But neither truck would start despite both having worked the previous day. Later, a telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through in the fire as they had initially thought, but cut by someone. The driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. Other witnesses claimed to have seen the children themselves. One woman who had been watching the fire from the road said she had seen some of them peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Years later in the 60s, Jeannie found in the mail a letter addressed to her, postmarked in Central City, Kentucky with no return address. Inside was a picture of a young man around 30 with features strongly resembling Louis, who would have been in his 30s if he had survived. On the back was written, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie Leal, boys A90132 or 35. The Sodders never stopped believing their children were alive, and Jeannie wore black in mourning every day for the rest of her life. It gets even weirder. The initial report said the fire burned the kids' corpses entirely, but a person who worked on a crematorium said that, during a cremation they burned the bones for 2 hours after to fully cremate them, and the fire's temperature and the time the fire occurred weren't enough for it to happen. The salesman who visited the Sodders' house 2 months before the fire was also part of the coroner's jury, that stated about the fire completely burning the kids' corpses, and one of the firemen later retracted himself, saying he found a heart of one of the kids, that later was proved to be actually an ox liver. A Chinese girl was found in thousands of pieces in multiple bags on the street in 1996. The killer is still not found. My God, this is horrific. Don't Google it if you have a weak heart. The Setagaya family murders. The killer stayed in their house for a while after the murders as if nothing had happened. He allegedly made himself some tea, took a nap, used their computer for a bit and helped himself to some of their ice cream. I feel like someone who is that comfortable being in a house with people he just murdered has done it before, and will probably continue as long as they are not caught. Andrew Gosden. Smart boy who had a perfect attendance record skipped school to go to a train station to buy a one-way ticket to King's Cross in London on his own. As soon as he leaves the station he seemingly vanishes in an area crawling with CCTV cameras. None of the CCTV cameras in the entirety of London had saved footage of him as the police waited 2 weeks before asking local businesses if there was any footage of him saved, and there's no evidence of him ever leaving the city. There are theories he was groomed or got snatched off the street, but that's pretty much impossible to do in such a busy area. He had a PSP on him when he disappeared, but Sony confirmed no PSN account had ever been made on his account. He had no access to the internet at home and didn't even have a mobile phone. Strangely, he left the charger for the PSP at home, suggesting he possibly intended to come back. Delphi Bridge murders. 2 preteen girls were murdered near an abandoned train bridge in Indiana, 2017. One girl got audio and video of the suspect walking toward them. 2 years later and La is still taking tips from the public. Zeb Quinn. The guy goes missing, his car is found with a live puppy inside, headlights still on and a pair of lips drawn on the back window with lipstick. The Beaumont children deserves a mention. 3 kids in Adelaide, South Australia who went down to the beach in 1966 and never came back. They were seen talking to a man and then walking around the suburb, but that's it. Never came home, never found, nobody ever arrested, police still following tips and digging for bodies more than 50 years later. Kids were like 9, 7 and 4. All 3 just vanished. Parents refused to move from the house for a very long time, in case they ever came home. Does my head in? The body in boiler stack 9. Basically, some maintenance workers found a well-cooked body in the stack of a boiler in the steam plant at a paper mill. Nobody knows who it was, but there are signs that he died very slowly. He was found with his clothes off and wrapped around his feet and hands as if to protect himself from the searing hot metal. The theory is that he was exploring during the weekend when the boiler was off, got stuck, and was unable to alert anyone before they started the boilers back up the following week. The body had been in there for months by the time he was found. I read about this just last month, and the thought of how long and slow your death would be as your skin slowly starts to peel, and knowing there's no way out and your screams for help go unheard terrifies me. Just what happened to MH370? A massive airliner en route from one heavily populated city to another suddenly hangs a hard left before quietly disappearing from radar. No distress signal, no emergency call, just gone. Only one piece of debris ever found, washed up on a beach thousands of miles away. What the hell happened? More than one piece of debris has been found now. It's pretty certain the plane went down in the sea. The Atlantic did a long read about this. The journalist, an aviation expert, believes the pilot committed suicide after killing everyone on board by depressurizing the cabin, taking one long flight into the Indian Ocean, and crashing the plane. A few years ago, two Dutch girls went traveling to North/Central America, Panama, and they went missing. The phone records were weird. They called 911 multiple times throughout the next few nights. Their camera was found with dozens of random photos taken in the middle of the night, as if they were trying to see using the flash. Then I think they found some body parts, a boot with a foot still inside and a pelvis bone or something. Really creepy. I read up on this one a lot when it happened. I believe the consensus is that they got lost on a trail and tried crossing a rope bridge in the dark. One of the girls slipped and fell and was badly injured or killed. The other took photos of where she had fallen and made a kind of map and also took photos of that. She tried to go for help but also must have fallen or died from starvation. Animals and rain are likely to blame for the body parts being as scattered as they were. It's a very sad tale and a hugely cautionary one. If you're going hiking and you don't know anything about the area, be very prepared and very careful. I've posted about this before elsewhere, but the Villisca Axe murders has got to be up there for me. Sometime around midnight between Sunday, June 9th and Monday, June 10th, 1912, a person bludgeoned to death 8 people sleeping, including 2 adults and 6 children aged 5 through 12. The Bodom Lake Murders. In 1960 in Finland, a group of 4 teenagers went camping near of Lake Bodom. 2 girls both aged 15 and 2 guys both aged 18. At night 3 of them were killed and only one of the boys survived. Their bodies and the horribly injured boy were found a few hours before noon. The badly injured boy was laying on top of the bloody tent. If you search for pictures of the tent, you can see that it's completely drenched in blood. The boy was not fully conscious and had several fractures in his skull. He survived and is still alive today with no memory of what happened. The police tried everything to find out what happened. Later in 2005 the survivor was accused of being the murderer. I however do not believe this to be true. Some of the teen's possessions were taken, wallets, shoes etc. Some were later found in the forest 500 meters away. With the injuries he had, walking that distance would have been impossible. Also, why come back to the crime scene? There was also no way this boy could have caused himself injuries to the back of the head. Also, some things like the leather jacket from the boy that died still haven't been found. To search for the murderer, the largest manhunt in Finland's history was conducted. 88 searched criminals were found in the forests of Espoo as a result, but not the murderer. There were multiple sightings of a light-haired man walking nearby the crime scene before and after the crime. He was never found. Edit. I forgot to tell how they were killed. Their heads were bashed and hit with a big rock/steel rod. They were also stabbed through the tent fabric with a knife. The cause of death for the 3 were head injuries. One of the girls had been stabbed over 10 times. Didn't they keep finding pairs of hands and feet around Hollywood Hills a few years back? I never heard an update on that case. I know there's still shoes left with feet in them, washed on a shore in Canada. Really creepy since it already happened over 15 times. It's almost certain that it's the remains of people's bodies jumping to their deaths on a bridge nearby. Still creepy though. Okay, so maybe creepy to me at least. When I was 5 my dad didn't come to pick me up at the weekend as usual. My parents had been divorced for a few years but we're on relatively good terms and co-parenting by all accounts. The next day my mom took me round because I was upset and she was pissed off. No answer at the door but his car and work van were on the drive. She still had a key to the house so let us in to find everything in place. His wallet and keys on the kitchen table, dog in his bed. She fed the dog and went back home. After a couple of days still no contact, so she went back round. Everything was just as she found it last time, all belongings and clothes there, his bags and suitcase still in the cupboard, just a hungry dog. She took the dog back with her and spoke to his side of the family. No one had heard from him for about a week, but nothing out of the ordinary. A mutual friend at his work said he hadn't been in for a week either, and their boss was furious. She called the police and reported him missing. They found no clues, his wallet, keys and cars all at the house, his passport was in the drawer, his petty cash stash of about £500 was where it was always kept. No signs of struggle, no signs of his bank accounts hadn't been touched for a week, and no out of the ordinary or large transactions or withdrawals over the previous months. Long story short, they found nothing and eventually shelved the case, and 23 years later still no contact with any friends or family. His parents and brother have all since passed away, never knowing what happened. Amy Bradley. She was on a cruise with her family when she went missing. They only have suppositions on when exactly she disappeared, but it was on the ship, since the last sight of her was when the ship was en route to the Antilles. One of the theories is that she was sold to sexual slavery. But the details of her disappearance are really creepy. The fact she was taken in an enclosed space, and nobody saw or found anything, is baffling. Also, the ship's crew were quite uncooperative, first with the family and then the FBI, leading some people to think they had a kind of deal with a sex ring. Amy had told to her parents, the night prior her disappearance, that she was creeped out by some cruise members who were insistent for her to go with them on shore in Curacao. I'm not sure about that, but the fact is, her case is really sad. Some tourists have claimed to have seen her on the shore months later, malnourished and terrified, with two men next to her. As of right now, it's been 21 years and she's still missing. I remember a story, sadly I don't recall any names, but it was / quite a well-known story where a German dude disappeared. So, this guy is on vacation with his friends. One night he gets in a fight with some guys at a club. His friends assumed they were Russian but weren't sure, as they were really drunk. Dude goes outside to get some fresh air. His friends follow him. When he wasn't returning, they find him outside with a head injury. Apparently, the guys from the club returned with some friends to beat him up. The next day he visits a doctor and is diagnosed with a small ear injury. He isn't allowed to fly and gets some medicine. He delays his fly home for a week or so, but not his friends. Now, this is where the story gets strange. For the next days this dude sends paranoid messages to his mother and friends, telling them he feels weird, that something is strange, and that he is watched and followed by someone. In one of his last messages, he asked his mother to Google the medicine the doctor gave him. On the day of his departure he was filmed and seen at the airport. He was approached by security, I don't know why, and brought into a room. Security later said, he was really nervous and always looking around as if he was expecting to be followed. Suddenly he went into a full panic and stormed out of the room, leaving his backpack and all his belongings behind. Security footage showed him running out of the airport across the street and into the open fields. That was the last anybody has seen of him. Sounds like psychosis caused by brain trauma if I had to guess. Concussions can cause all sorts of side effects like anxiety and depression. The Angikuni Lake Village disappearance. An entire village of Inuits just up and vanished. Upwards to 25 to 30 people disappeared, leaving behind burning fire pits, clothes with needles in them and rotten food on plates in the homes. There was no sign of struggles or a panic. People just disappeared. There's one from near me called, Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm? Some lads discovered the body of a woman hidden inside an elm. Nobody knows who she was, but graffiti appeared saying, Who put Bella in the wych elm? And it seems to appear every so often around the area with no one knowing who does it. The Dyatlov Pass incident. 10 experienced hikers set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union. Their trip is well documented, both with camera shots and writings, because they were testing for an elite mountaineering instructing license. One member, Yuri Yudin, has to turn back because of a flare-up of old health issues. He agrees to meet them in the town they were supposed to arrive at on February 12. On February 20th, still no sign of them? Rescuers send out a party and find the following. The tent abandoned with all of their shoes in it. Keep in mind, This is a Russian winter and very experienced travelers. The tent appears to have a large slash on the back made from the inside, as if there had been something blocking the front of the tent. The 9 bodies were scattered. 6 appearing to have died of hypothermia, 3 from apparent physical trauma. 1 victim had a fractured skull, 2 others had major chest trauma. According to the doctor who examined them, the force required to cause the damage sustained would have been extremely high, comparable to the force of a car crash. One of the victims, perhaps most disturbingly, was missing her tongue and eyes. None were wearing shoes. 2 victims were dressed only in underwear. Again, I cannot stress to you enough how experienced these people are. One was a World War II vet with 4 medals, from a division with 80% fatality. It was a running joke in his division that you only got 1 to 2 medals, because then you either were unfit for duty or dead. And he had 4. It was documented that some compelling force must have made the 9 hikers flee their tents. No one knows what that force could have been. There are many intriguing theories, but all seem to have some bit of contradicting evidence making them seem implausible. Epstein's suicide. Feel like that isn't a mystery at all. Dude had dirt on a lot of high-profile people. Black Dahlia 10,000%. Cut in half and completely drained of blood, left somewhere posed for maximum effect. It still gives me the heebs. No matter how you look at it or what theory you subscribe to, none really 100% fit, and even if you consider it solved by a theory, someone still did this to that poor woman. Literally terrifying. Also, as a warning, pretty grim pics pop up if you image search, so be warned.